And this is why I think Paul is admonishing over and over and over again in his churches, not just in marital relationships, but in all relationships, to be gracious, to be overly gracious with one another. And I think it's worth asking, okay, so what is the nature of someone who is gracious? And I think, for starters, I think grace is something that cannot be given begrudgingly. Yeah. It has to be given with free will. It has to be given with a certain degree of even enthusiasm. It has to be wholehearted. When grace is given, there can't be any strings. It can't feel from the other person that there's any strings attached to it. And then from you yourself, when you give grace, there can't be a thought in your mind, this better be reciprocated the next time I mess up. All of that can't be a part of someone who is giving grace, or there just has to be an emotional freedom to it. It's just like giving any kind of gift. I mean, there have been gifts that I've given my wife where I've picked something out that I love, and I can't wait for her to have it. And I'm hoping so much that she'll like it. And I gave her a painting for Christmas this year. We were in a restaurant and there was an artist in the restaurant. And so I went and found a print of it, and I got it like 2 months before Christmas. And for 2 months, I had this painting I could not wait to give to her. And when she opened it on Christmas, I was so happy, and I hope she liked it, and she did. But that's the way grace should be given. It should be given with just an enthusiasm. Yep. And the thing about grace is that it's not as though you're pretending that there wasn't a sin or that a sin didn't exist here. Grace is necessary because sin exists, and because something untoward has been done. And so it's not pretending that something hasn't been done. It's acknowledging that something has been done. But instead of giving to that person what they gave to you in kind, it's to give them what they didn't give you, which is grace, which is mercy, which is joy and love and all of that. And so grace in many ways actually testifies, to sin. Did I say something funny there? Mm-mm. Okay, there was a sharp exhale of humor.
No, I breathed in.
Okay. So grace is not acknowledging that there is no sin. It's definitely an admittance that there was sin. Yeah. But it's also not tolerance of a sinful person. Just because you're gracious doesn't mean that you're tolerating sinful human beings. When you think of a story of grace in the Bible, like one of the biggest ones that you think of is the prodigal son and the father. And it's not like there's not an acknowledgement of sin in that story. It's not like there was a tolerance of sin. There was an expectation that things had to be different for this relationship to work. But there was just an abundance of, I'm so glad that you're back, I forgive you, alongside an expectation of things being different and a reasonable expectation of how that's going to happen. So I would say that, people who are tolerant in relationships, actually, they enable bitterness. They stockpile bitterness in a relationship because tolerance is not the same thing as grace. Tolerance is like, I will take it until I reach my limit, and then I'm going to explode. Grace is for this to never get built up. And so grace is not a toleration of things either. And so, marriage requires a great deal of grace giving, a discipline of grace giving. And I would say it requires two people. In order for a marriage to be fun, and in order for a marriage to be something that people in the world go, that is what I want, it requires two people who easily give grace. Arguably more than any other relationship, marriage needs grace because we hurt each other the most.
Yep.
There's no one probably in Megan's life that has hurt her more than me. And the only way that this relationship works is that if she continues to forgive me, because honestly, she could create a list of ways that I have hurt her over the years. And my list would be larger than anybody else's. Take the most evil person in the world. They have not sinned against Megan the way that I have. And so the only way that this works is if she forgives me completely, and that she pours grace on me. And that's why marriages typically don't work out in our societies, because there's a reluctance to give that type of grace. And I think people, they don't want to be taken advantage of. They're afraid grace isn't going to be given in return. There's a lot of reasons for that, but this is why we need grace the most. And so, where in a marriage, I think do we need grace a lot? I think that's a good thing to talk about. Like there are some areas of marriage that are just common to almost everybody where there needs to be a lot of grace. I think one certainly during this quarantine,
Yes.
more grace than normal has to be given.
I'm reminded of, we have some dear friends, Todd and Cheryl Fink, who have mentored us in our marriage and parenting for years and years. And they said that there's times in their marriage where they've just, for whatever reason, both woken up on the wrong side of the bed, and they're kind of going at each other. And then they just have to, at a certain point, look at each other and they say, whoopsie, like this was just a rough day. Let's just start over. So I think, quarantine it's going to be a time of whoopsie.
Yep.
And so much grace is needed.
Yeah, there's not always this need to like deconstruct. Why did you do this to me? It's actually, sometimes it's just totally necessary to go, you know what? Can we just admit this was
tired of being stuck at home.
This was a bad couple hours. Let's forgive one another.
Yes.
And that's great. I think other areas where we need to give constant grace is that each person in a marriage relationship has certain character weaknesses.
Yep.
That they may have for their entire lives.
Absolutely. Well, and the truth of it, what I can say 100% with certainty is that you're married to a sinner. I am married to a sinner. I'm married to a broken human, a fallen human. He is married to a broken, messy human. We all have our character weaknesses and our sins, and we're going to need lots of grace in it. I'm fearful, and I can get controlling in that, and I need grace. Chris can be selfish, and he needs grace. Like, this is how it is. There's no way around that.
Yeah, I think grace understands that, okay, these weaknesses, there's going to be progress over the course of a marriage, but it may not go away. And
Yep.
the marriage relationship has got to be willing to give grace for the long run.
Yep.
And again, it's not up to me to change Megan. It's not my job to make sure that she is different, and I'm not supposed to hold her to that. It's my job to give her love, to make her radiant, and to forgive. And that's my job. Her job, she's gonna have to worry about her own character, but that's the way that's gonna work in a marriage. And I'm gonna have to be willing to forgive over and over and over again these areas where maybe she's been weak throughout the course of our relationship. Yep. And without going, okay, if she's not changed by this time, now there's going to be trouble. That's not the way to think about things when you're thinking about them graciously within a relationship.
There's the other part of that, just the character weakness. I think there's things that, because there's times when I'm weak because I'm sinful, and there's times that I'm weak just because I'm weak, or because there's certain capabilities that I have and I don't have. And I think we've got to be willing to give grace to areas where our spouse can or can't handle a certain thing that we think they might need to. Chris and I many times, like, he'll run to the grocery store, for instance, and I'll say, "Oh, can you take the little kids with you so I can get this done?" He's like, "Oh, no, I just want to," he'd rather just go to the store, and the thought of running to the store and having them with him. And meanwhile, I'm like, why is that so hard? I do that all the time. If I do that to him, if for everything I have like that with him, he has a thing like that with me. We have to give each other grace for areas that we can or can't handle things, instead of sitting here saying, well, he should be able to do this, or he shouldn't have to do that. Like, what does that matter? What if, instead of me worrying about what he should or shouldn't be able to do, what if I give him grace in the areas that he says, I can't, that's hard for me.
I feel like that grocery store story that doesn't make me look very good.
You can tell one from me.
No, that's all right. But
what I mean more when they were little.
No, that's good.
When they're little. Taking little kids to the grocery store is a pain. Yeah. I'll give it to you.
I'm not easy to live with.
That's not what I meant.
But I think another area where we have to give grace is that we all just have individual ways of doing things.
Yes.
I think writing this lesson is one of them. I spend my weeks writing various lessons. Megan does the same thing, but I have my way of doing it. She has her way of doing it. And so then we converge on a time like this where we're not seeing that eye to eye. And boy, you have to give grace.
Yes.
People clean the house differently.
Yes.
They make dinner differently.
Yep.
Disciplining your children. There could be differing views on that. And all of this has to be marinated in a lot of grace.
Yes.
These conversations, these discussions, these expectations.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say. These differences, sometimes they're very insignificant. Like, which way do we pull if you're going out of the neighborhood to church? I want to go left, he wants to go right. Like, very insignificant, but can become tense, right? Or they can become these huge things of great consequence, like how we're going to parent our kids, or what does our walk with God look like? Things like that.
Yeah.
But grace.
And then I think lastly, probably an area that maybe the most sensitive area in a marriage for a lot of people is just intimacy. You know, intimacy it's hard. And it's funny, you think after being married for decades, it stops being hard, and a lot of parts get easier and other parts get more difficult, and there's so much insecurity that's brought up with intimacy, and grace has to be baptized in grace. Yep. Intimacy.
Well, I think if you ask Chris, when is a good time to be intimate, what would you say the answer to that is? Always. There's no, if you ask me what is a good time, there's probably a more extensive list of things that need to be in place. Mm-hmm. There's more. I always think that's one of the great ironies of marriage, is God kind of didn't necessarily put us all on the same pages, and either one, he made a mistake with how he made men and women differently, or two, he did that on purpose, and this becomes an area where literally we really get to practice a lot of grace with one another. And so, I mean, if you have a spouse that has more of a desire for intimacy than you do, you can't look at that spouse as being a Neanderthal, like a caveman who only thinks about one thing. You know, conversely, if you have a spouse that has less.
My wife is so intent on pronouncing Neanderthal, which is not the correct. Neanderthal is the correct way, but just so you know, that's actually the correct way.
It is Neanderthal.
And you really enunciate it.
Anyway, if you have a spouse that has a lesser desire for intimacy, you can't look at that person as being just cold and frigid and they don't care. Like, again, grace, so much grace, such an area and opportunity for grace that if this wasn't being recorded, we could probably go into more, but we'll stop.
I think, in the end, we, in counseling so many marriages over the years, the traumas that are inflicted on one another in a marriage are deep and long, and the hurts are deep and long, and the injuries, the lists go on and on and on, and there's no way to source it back to a point where you could undo everything or where you could resolve everything. At a certain level, if you're in a troubled marriage, the only solution is that you are going to have to forgive. You are going to have to give grace, and so is the other person. And that's not a switch that you can turn on. That's something that has to be practiced. That's a discipline that you have to do every single day, day in and day out, over years, to build a healthy security within a relationship. And right now, as we're stuck at home with one another, it's a good time to practice a ton of grace, and it starts off by planning to be graceful, and when you plan to do something and you do it over and over again, pretty soon it becomes normal. And then once it becomes normal, it becomes unconscious. And that's when the grace that's when a marriage gets defined, by grace. And so we had a couple assignments to close out today. I think number one, what we'd like you to do is just, you need to sit and think about this. Like, take some time to really just think about this concept of giving grace. Ask yourself what situations, just begin with, what situations in the last week would have gone differently if you had given grace, and really think long and hard about that. And then I think after both parties have thought about that, have asked that question of themselves and have answered that question, I think it's a good time to come together and pray about yourself and let the other person pray about themselves. And it'd be interesting what comes out, during that prayer. And then one last thing.
The last question then, after you've thought about it, prayed about it, is to ask your spouse, where do you need more grace from me? What's an area that I feel like you need more grace? Yeah, I need more grace. I need to give more grace. I always mess up these.
So anyway, once again, for visiting with us, and we'll make some more Love in the Time of COVID videos. I think our next one will probably be about balance in life and family and using grace to create that balance. But in any case, thank you again for being here, and we'll see you next time. High five. I don't know. Boom. I'm serious this time. If we don't do this one all the way through, we're going to do this on Monday.
But we said that it needs to happen on Friday.
Stuff happens. 1, 2, 3. Oh, you did too slow. 1, 2, 3.